so glad to have you here for Open Night, Mike. And we are so excited to have Dr. Betty Murray, who's going to be joining us any minute. Oh, there she is, the
Uh,
busy woman that she is. How are you, dear?
how are you?
Good to see you. I see you all over Instagram these days. You are running ads and you have got your supplements, and I'm like, rocking. I know this.
Yeah, topical facial estrogen. Hey,
There you go. I love it.
yes, yeah.
Well, I'm excited to be sharing tonight with you, and we've got a lot of wonderful people on here who are going to be asking some of the most pressing questions.
Awesome.
So, as you know, tonight is a women's hormonal health open mic. And so I think because it's open mic, and who knows where this will take us, all things good, I'm sure. But let's look at our poll questions first to get an idea of who we've got joining us, so we know have an idea of maybe some key things that we can throw out. So, oh, there I go. And so here's our questions. So the first question is, what best describes your current interest in hormonal health? So we've got a few people that are experiencing some symptoms and they want some clarity. Always a good place to come get information. I want to understand my body better. Fabulous. I'm curious about perimenopause or menopause, all of us.
Mhm.
I'm here supporting someone else. God bless you. And I'm just exploring to see what you got. Well, you're going to get more than you hope for. So, all of that's wonderful. So, I see a lot of good questions or people with inquisitive minds. So, that's awesome. Next thing is, which hormonal symptoms feel most relevant to you right now? Mood changes or ability? Not that much. Weight gain. Boy, is that a constant and a continual one. Fatigue and low energy, sleep issues, anxiety or overwhelm. Okay, well, the weight is something that we as women have been socialized around. And there's a lot of good science on how and why we can get that off. And both Betty and I have been there. Let's see. Three, have you ever felt dismissed or misunderstood when asking for help with your hormonal symptoms? Yes, often, 38% of the time, or sometimes 43% of the time. To the 5% of you that said, no, I've had good support, I am so glad. The other 81% of us have said, yeah, I've blown off or just ignored or not given the answers we need. And that's kind of what we want to do tonight is make sure you have the answers that you need. And we can point you in the direction so you can get additional help. Number four, what stage of life are you? Cycling or reproductive, postpartum, perimenopause. We've got about 19% that are going through the change, 68% who are there, and the rest are either not sure or don't want to say at this point. And that's okay because if you're not sure, you may be in that whole peri thing and you may be earlier than you think. And Betty can certainly attest to that. She
Mhm.
started very early.
Yeah.
The biggest question you hope to have tonight is HRT right for me? HRT, or we could also put BHRT, and we'll go into that. Should I consider testing? Where do I start? What's actually causing all my symptoms? So, boy, that gives us a great place to jump off from.
Mhm.
And I absolutely love it. For those of you who've not bet Medi, or met Betty,
Been doing that all day, man. I'm hoping it's going to stop. I've been on live all day.
ditto. Uh, So Betty has been with us multiple times. Betty just got her PhD and did several years of research. She is a walking encyclopedia. She owns and operates and runs a women's healthcare and hormone replacement center, Live Well Dallas.
Mhm.
You probably have seen her on social media because she does cutting edge everything. And so I'm just super excited to have her tonight as a resource, as a friend, as a colleague, and because she's so good on the fly. So, with that being said, tell us what's the latest in your world, Betty. What are you seeing in the world of hormones? And then we'll jump off with kind of being unseen, unheard, and where people can go to get help?
Yeah, yeah. We've been doing hormone replacement. So I'm a PhD, not an MD I don't personally prescribe. I have prescribers that work for me in my clinic and then work in my telemedicine company that does hormone replacement. And I think probably the first thing we need to talk about is number one, the FDA finally removed the black box warning off of
Woo,
estrogen products,
woo, woo. Yeah.
right? So the reality is, if you feel confused about this time period of life, what's happening, what treatment is available there, all of those things, it is because of the Women's Health Initiative and the 22-year gap in research, training, recommendations, and willingness for practitioners to actually read that study and look at it. So most everybody who's a Gen X, right? They're they were just not educated. And the providers, I think the thing that most people need to understand is your gynecologist, your internal medicine doctor, your physicians were never trained to examine or even deal with menopause, right? So even today, less than 20% of medical schools have any real training around menopause. They might have an hour or two when it's a third of your life, right? And so for everybody, 100% of women go through it. 85 to 87% are highly symptomatic for an average of 8 years. So that means that you could be an outlier and not have very much, or you could be like me and go for 14, right? And have it start fairly early and be misunderstood. And the even worse part is, of the 100% of women that could explore hormone replacement therapy, right? I personally don't feel every woman has to have it, but I think every woman 100% deserves to explore it, regardless of age or anything else. Only 7% statistically in the United States right now are actually being treated with hormone replacement therapy, right? 50 million women, 6,000 a day, go through menopause, right? So I think if you're feeling like, what the heck is going on? That's right, because there's been basically a blackout on real information and also research.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a couple people asking, what hormone chart are we working from? We're not actually working from any chart right now. We were reading the questions that, if you got here early, you had a chance to fill out poll questions. So we had an idea of a background. And what Betty was just talking about is there has been a moratorium almost, if you will, by a lot of physicians. I don't want to look at hormones. I don't want to discuss hormones. I literally have a physician in this area that had two nurse practitioners that were starting to do some hormone replacement and women's health care. And he said, I forbid you from working on this in this office. Women are nothing but a problem. Women create all sorts of legal issues. Everything's going to cause cancer. And if you want to do this, you can't do it here. Now, guys, this is 2025, and this is someone who's saying, if we can't put them on an antidepressant, or if we can't shut them up with pain medicine, we don't want them in our practice. That's when women have felt unheard. But as Betty just said, the FDA just went, oops, maybe we looked at this wrong. There isn't this major warning. Maybe there is beneficial. And back in May of 2024, the Journal of Menopause had a fabulous article that came out that was a review of all the Medicare, Medicaid charts for 10 million women. And it showed if you had had any amount of HRT or BHRT, and then how many of those women had disease versus how many didn't have disease. Now, Betty, what was your takeaway from that? Because I can tell you what mine was.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. So, number one, if you're in Medicare, you're over 65, right? And so they were looking at women at the moment, they started the study, they were looking retrospectively. So they looked from 2006 to 2022. And they when they examined the women that were on hormones and stayed on them, or the women that started and did them for a short period of time and then stopped, they had a reduced risk of dying from three different cancers, right? Or actually four: ovarian, lung, breast, colon, right? All significant risk for women, generally speaking, right? And when we looked at cardiovascular risk, which is the number one killer of women, period, cardiovascular stroke, heart attack, you know, blood clots like deep vein thrombosis. Over all of the endpoints they were looking at, hormone replacement therapy, especially if you continued it, but if you'd taken it, reduced your risk, right? And I think this is really important because the reality is as a woman, we've been told a lot of things like you can't start after X. You can only do it for a short period of time. And this study basically turns all of that on its head. Now, it wasn't an interventional study, so they weren't like taking one group and putting them on hormones and the other. They were looking backwards in time and then using the aggregate data to look at to say what really happened, right? It's called causal comparative studies, done all the time, mind you, all the time. And so what it did do is it showed that, you know, we had been perpetuating the story that there was a risk there that wasn't, and that we're really opening the door for women to continue to do hormones and continue to do them long term, right? And that they're actually more protective.
And I think that's the biggest thing that we've learned is they're more protective. Just like when you're at your peak health and your hormones are at a peak level and you feel your best, look your best, your skin is radiant, your hair is strong, and then all of a sudden we go into decline and we're told, well, that's just normal. Well, that's just aging. Well, there's a way to age gracefully. You don't have to keep your hormones at those same levels, but you need to have them to a place, whether you're doing it through diet, whether you're doing it through supplementation, whether you're doing it through a number of different ways, that you feel good. Life should not be a misery. And so I think that's a good kickoff point. Will you remind people a little bit about your story and what led you into opening your facility?
Yeah. So actually, what I was actually in tech. So so if you're like, what? So yeah, I was in tech. I was telling somebody this the other day. I was actually hired for the company I worked for to prepare for Y2K. So anybody that's old, like older, I'm 56 this year, you remember that, right? Like my job for 2 years was to prepare entire computer systems for that transition. So, you know, the company could continue to run. But while I worked for that company, I was the first female hired. I worked 3 times as long as everybody else, hundreds of hours a week. It was crazy, and I burned myself out. But while I was working there, I was diagnosed with colitis, and which is an autoimmune digestive disorder, if you're not familiar with it. And I asked the doctor if I could change my diet and change the trajectory of that disease. And he laughed in my face and told me it had nothing to do with it. So on the side, I was like, I'm just going to go take some nutrition classes, because this is what I spent my free time, probably a lot like you guys. This is before videos. It's before the internet, the internet was there, but it wasn't like it is today. And so I was like, I'm just going to take some classes. And when I got into organic chemistry, I was like, oh my God, this is actually what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm good at technical things, scientific things. And so I, sort of shifted gears, went back to school, got a master's, went out, opened Living Well Dallas in over 20 years ago. And, we've been treating tens of thousands of patients. But what really got me is as I started looking more and more into autoimmunity, it's 10 to 1 female to male, right? It shows up in, maturation, your early teens, early 20s. It shows up post-pregnancy and around major hormone shifts. And then we see an uptick in perimenopause as well as from diagnosis or exacerbation of symptoms. And I was like, that's all hormone based, despite the fact that everybody kind of ignores the fact that it's mostly female. And the other side of it too is, I went through getting a tubal. So I had a tubal because I didn't want to be on birth control. I know I've seen some questions go by about birth control. I didn't want to be on it anymore, but I also wanted control of my fertility. And at the time I was like, okay, that's over. And once I got my tubes tied, everybody said, nothing's going to happen. But you know what? My hair started falling out. I got acne all along my chin. This is in my late 30s, like 36, 37, 38. I had been a bodybuilder, so I had been in the bodybuilding community for years doing the exact same thing. I gained 35 pounds in 6 months. And everybody said, oh, it's your thyroid. It's shot from being a bodybuilder, all that dieting and stuff that you do. And so, and I'm in functional medicine, mind you. I have access to some of the best minds, right? Some of the early adopters. And it was adrenal, it was this, it was that, it was that. What it really was is early perimenopause. right? And even though I was doing some things there, I wasn't managed properly because we weren't looking at the hormone detoxification pathways in that way like we do today, right? And that literally was my research PhD. So I'm one of very few people that have a deep understanding of that world. And my 40s stink. They were terrible. They sucked. They were terrible. I had a horrible experience. Once I went back and started really digging, I feel better today at 56 than I did at 40. So I understand that confusion because I'm like, if I'm in this community and I'm highly plugged in, and I am a world's expert in a lot of this stuff, and I am confused and can't get better at the time without more knowledge, then I understand why you feel that way.
Absolutely. So let's get a little more basis and then let's dive into some of these questions because we really want this to be an open mic so you can ask questions. So remember, Betty is not an MD. She's not a DO. She is a PhD. She's a researcher. I am a PharmD. I have a board certification in clinical nutrition. I do, like Betty, have a telemedicine practice. We are not your providers. What we will do is give general specifics. We can point you toward providers. The thing we can't do is say, because we don't have your whole background, we can't give specific medical advice. We will give general advice and we will give general direction, but it'll be more direction than perhaps you've had elsewhere. So if you are currently on HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, or BHRT, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, put a 1 in the chat. Let's go ahead and see how many people are on hormone therapy currently. So if you're on hormone therapy, drop down a 1. Okay, I see a few ones. If you're not, drop down a 2. Because I want to see how many people are not that are looking. Okay. All right. So I'm now going to address the 2s. Of all the 2s, how many of you are interested in doing BHRT, learning about HRT? Okay, Joy says she's about ready to start. Put a Y if you're thinking this is something you want to learn more about and you're gathering information to say, is this right? Okay, then you are in the right place. Absolutely. I love this. So, Betty, do you ever have women that come into your clinic and say, I'm nervous to get started. What do I need to know? And how do we
Oh
make
yeah.
it for me?
Yeah, and I would say it would be odd to me if somebody didn't have some reservations and say, I want to know more information. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. It would be very strange to me that somebody didn't. Everybody just needs to recognize it's okay to be unsure, right? It's okay to be unsure. I think there's, to kind of level set, the first thing that most people don't know is the first estrogen prescription was written in 1942, right? Hormone replacement, particularly estrogen replacement, and then synthetic progestins, and then bioidentical forms of hormones have been around that long. And it was standard of care to give hormone replacement for hot flashes, night sweats. If you went into your primary care doctor back in like 1989, 1990 and said, I feel terrible, and these things are going on, they would have given you Premarin as fast as they would give you a statin or an SSRI, right? And it really was one study, literally one study that sort of shut that down. Now, the other thing to know too is we also have a laundry list of studies that were done prior to this, looking at breast cancer risk, cardiovascular risk, and other things. And we don't have studies that showed taking hormones in the form of estrogen increased breast cancer risk. Never. And actually, even in the Women's Health Initiative, the women that were on Premarin alone, right, that took that pill alone, they had a 23% reduced risk for breast cancer compared to the women that were on nothing at all during that study. And so we're here like level setting that. And so everybody, it's okay to be there, right? And I do this all day long. Like I have been on camera for like 6 hours today having these conversations, and it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So since we brought up the big breast cancer thing and we brought up, I've had cervical cancer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I had a breast cancer scare. Since we've got the big C word, first of all, no, all of this is treatable. So take a big deep breath, everybody. Second of all, we now know why and how this comes about, the whole biochemistry. Like Betty said, I love organic chemistry. I love the biochemistry. It's like pathways, pathways, pathways. It's no different than driving your car and going, I want to go from LA to Chicago. You got to have a map. You got to know, because if not, you may end up in Dallas. Now you could visit Betty in Dallas, but that's not necessarily where you were headed. So let's talk for a second, Betty, about what is the big breast cancer scare and how, if people want to be on hormones, can they avoid that?
Yeah, well, so there's a book that I think every person should read, and I'm gonna also put this in the chat here. And if you don't like really dry stuff and you like to listen, like you're a podcast listener, get it on Audible, and it's called Estrogen Matters by Dr. Abram Blooming. He is a breast cancer oncologist. He graduated from medical school about roughly the year I was born. And he was an early critic of the Women's Health Initiative, but he also knew that that actually was wrong, right? His wife is even a breast cancer survivor who is on hormone replacement therapy. And this book, the reason why I think it's important is he goes through literally all the studies, right? He and another woman, Carol Tavares, who's a fellow PhD, went through all the studies. And we have lots and lots of studies looking at breast cancer. So here's a couple facts. Did you know that until the 1980s, when a lot of your newer chemotherapy drugs came out, the treatment for estrogen sensitive cancer prior to that was actually high dose estrogen?
I was going to say it was estrogen.
Yeah. Yeah. Tamoxifen is a synthetic estrogen, right? And actually, there's a ton of studies looking at, not a ton, but quite a few studies. I shouldn't use that kind of superfluous language. There are several studies, lots of studies that looked at using tamoxifen and estrogen together in the treatment of breast cancer. Some of them showed positive outcome, some showed negative outcome, right? So we've been told the story that estrogen causes cancer, but the logic would argue otherwise. Because if that was the case in your natural body producing estrogen, if that caused cancer, 20-year-olds would get it. But the average age of diagnosis in the United States for breast cancer is 62 years old. The risk for it goes up dramatically after menopause. And our risk goes to 1 in 8. So if you've heard that number, we are in about a 6 in 1,000. So 6 women out of 1,000 have that risk, right? And in your like late 40s, 50s, early 60s. And then when you're in your 80s, like mid 80s, it goes up to 1 in 8. Right? Because you have spelling errors in your DNA that starts to occur on the aging process if we're not actively fighting that, right? So the reality is it doesn't, right? It doesn't. And there's not a single study that has shown increased mortality risk from breast cancer. And current conventional standards, breast cancer treatment, obviously not a super fan because I'm more integrative, but the reality is a breast cancer caught early is 95% curable with today's standards, right? Breast cancer has gotten a lot of research dollars that are missing elsewhere, like endometriosis and all the other women's health things that are not researched.
And I'll tell you that the DNA company has a wonderful test called the DNA breast test. Now, I was one of the early guinea pigs for this test. I'm 62. I am healthy. I'm of normal body weight. And the bottom line was when I took this, it's a tear test. So what you do is you have a little piece of paper, it's a lab paper, you fold it down, you pull your eyelid down, you put it in, you shut your eyes for 5 minutes, you take it out, you send it back in a little test tube, and you send it back to the lab. And in a week, they tell you, kind of like Cologuard, positive or negative. And mine came back super positive. And I'm like, excuse me, I think you got the wrong test. I think you got the wrong woman. So I happen to know the owner of the company. I went in and talked to him and we looked at my numbers. And anything over 1 is a clinically significant. And I was a 2. And he said, Stephanie, I'm really embarrassed, but I'm concerned about you. So the interesting part of that was I'm autoimmune, the way Betty said she was autoimmune. I have my DNA done. My detox pathways are not good. My estrogen pathways are not good. But I had never really seriously looked at what I needed to do to keep my estrogen moving and detoxify it. Estrogen goes through your liver twice. The first time it goes through, it becomes more toxic. The second time it goes through, it becomes non-toxic. I was not taking care of my liver. Also, my gut. In the gut, if you don't have the right healthy gut function. We can't lock on to the estrogen and pull it out. It gets recycled, but it gets recycled in a more toxic form. So, gut health matters, liver health matters, knowing your DNA matters. Here's the best part of it. In 3 months, I took another test. My numbers had dropped by 40%. I got a call from the company saying, "What have you done?" And I said, "I'm using my DNA pathways to detoxify my body." Within 9 months, I was down to a negative test. If you're concerned about your pathways, knowing your DNA, using the DNA breast cancer test, preventative test, can catch from stage 0 up to stage 4. It does the best on stage 0, 1, and 2 when things are 95, 98%, fixable. And so that's what's fabulous. But before we even get there, we want to make sure all your systems are operating so that you don't have that problem. So, Betty, if somebody comes into your office and says, "I'm exploring, I'm interested," what kind of things do you talk to them about, things they need to prepare or get ready, or what kind of tests do you have them do to see how their body's functioning and if they are a candidate for
Yeah. So
hormone
we
replacement?
yeah, so so there's two camps, right? And so the standard of care, right? So the more conventional trained clinicians of the ones that do hormones, right? So conventionally trained clinicians that do hormones, right? So conventional Western medicine. The cookbook, or think of that as the recipe that they follow, that they sort of follow for every woman, says, the only reason why you treat menopause is to improve quality of life and get rid of hot flashes and night sweats. That's the indication for FDA approval, right? So they say, if I give you hormones, right? So I'm going to give you some estradiol. If you have a uterus, then I'm going to give you progesterone, hopefully a bioidentical micronized progesterone. And if your symptoms go away, you're good, right? That's the standard of care. They do not look to see, is it optimal? Is it going to do protection for other things? So we take a very different approach. Number one, we always like to test. And just like Dr. Stephanie was saying, if you're getting ready to drive somewhere, you need to have a starting point. You need to have your lefts, your right, and your turnarounds and your jug handles. You need all of those directions to get you to the other side. So we often start with testing in the beginning. We use blood, and there is a reason. Number one, we want to see metabolic hormones, liver function, insulin, glucose, lipids. We want to see a broader swath of how metabolically healthy you are. Because if you put really pristine hormones in a car that's all jacked up, they're not going to work very well, right? And I'm definitely not a practitioner, and my teams, whether it's in my clinic or in the telemedicine company, are not either the side that says you got to earn your hormones. We don't do that either, but we want to know, right? And we want to start addressing the diet and the lifestyle pieces. So we check hormones in blood, because then we kind of know, because we can see how much you're making, right? And if you're in menopause, it's probably very, very low, right? And we check the other estrogens like estrone, which you can see some of your DNA risk, with your DNA company. And then when we initiate treatment, we start low, because here's the thing. None of us know what our hormones were when we were optimal at 25. We have no idea. And if you were to line up 100 women and look at our bodies, we all look different. Why? Yeah, some of it's our genetics and our ancestry, but a whole bunch of it is hormones. If you're an estrogen dominant, high risk for estrogen toxicity, you're probably like me. And I'm going to be funny about this, but I got a badonkadonk butt. I'm super curvy. Never loved that. I always wanted to have the ballerina body. That's not how I'm wired, right? So I am an estrogen dominant person by nature, right? So I have very different hormone needs than somebody else. So when they blanket statement, here's the treatment, that's not true. Dr. Louise Newsom out of England, who's heading up their sort of menopause initiative for the entire country, did a study in her own patients. And she found at the normal dose, like the kind of the recommended dose at their version of NIH and their medical system, which is, I think, a 0.05 patch, 50% of her patients would be undertreated, 25% were overtreated, right? So we start lower, we turn on the receptors and we start increasing, looking at symptom improvement first. We check again, make sure the labs show that you're in a reference range that has been researched. Blood is where we research effective dose against osteoporosis, dementia, cardiovascular disease. So we check it because we want to know that you're matching what the literature says. Then we look at your DNA, and then we also look at how you metabolize it, which is your DNA in action through either a Dutch test, 24-hour urine hormone, because that's your epigenetics, right? DNA tells you what you're likely to do. The urine test tells you what you are doing. And here's the thing, if someone tries to talk you into a Dutch test and you're 5 years out on menopause, if you're not on hormones, those tests aren't accurate because there's so little going through there. It even says it on there. Like there's so little going through there, it's very hard for them to do the ratios. So it's better for you to wait, get on hormones, then check your pathways.
So I'm
And
going to make 2 points because you have made some huge points for people. One of the key words she said is we check your metabolic health. Now, you may have not heard this, but she didn't say we check your glucose. She said we check your insulin. Do you realize 99% of you have never had your insulin checked? Glucose is easy to check, and glucose can be stabilized. It's like, well, I'm not diabetic. I'm metabolically fine. My glucose is under 100. But if you look at your insulin, and if you're 1 to 5, it's like you've got a big bodyguard and your insulin is reactive and it's there to protect you. But if your insulin's 12 or 25, it's like you've got a bunch of Boy Scouts and they're running around and you're like, do you want a bunch of Boy Scouts or you want a bodyguard? Practitioners, the average practitioner is not testing for insulin. You've got to be metabolically sound to use hormones. Otherwise, you don't use them effectively. And that's when they take control of you. So that
yeah,
is the first point. I love that. The second point you said was that you start low and slow and that you build up. This takes time. You're not going to go in, take a pill or take a cream, and then all of a sudden tomorrow everything's great. There's going to be an adjustment period. And you may do 3 months ago, I don't know if I feel better, or maybe I'm feeling a little. I brought some show and tell, and you probably have some too, because I want to show people some of the different options. But it's better to start low, check those levels. I like blood levels as well. Some people like to do saliva levels. I think every woman needs to have a 24-hour urine or a metabolite test if they are on any kind of hormones so that we can see, because you get to see your cortisol and your organic acids and other things, but you get to see if we all have flour and water and eggs and milk, will we all make the same recipe? Betty might make a cake. I might make muffins. Somebody else might make bread. Just because you put hormones in doesn't mean you're going to get the same results. We've got to see what do your metabolites look like? How long are they hanging around? How's it going to make you feel? And I can tell you, one of my practitioners, as a pharmacist, I get to see what people are writing, not just for me, but for everyone else. And I noticed his uh, orders were always the same, 100% the same. And I went in and I said, hey, do you realize women are different? he, he's a board certified OBGYN. And he goes, of course I do. I said, then why do you write all of the same hormone creams for everyone? And he looked confused. And I said, you have a standard therapy and you don't change. He goes, well, it works for 75% of the women. I said, well, I'm not one of them. And he goes, well, the other 25%, maybe 5% come back and complain. And I said, yeah, and the rest are leaving your practice. He goes, well, I don't really see them leaving. I said, well, they're not happy. And trust me, we're talking. So
mm-hmm.
the thing is, I love when practitioners set frequent times to see you, to get you going and hear you, and you need to be heard. So for any of you maybe who haven't seen it, Betty was talking about, the patches and the 0.05. Let me show you what a patch looks like. Comes in this little box. It can be done weekly or bi-weekly. Comes in here, and I will tell you that it's probably maybe half the size of this. Most of them are clear and they just pop right on your tummy or on your thigh or on your buttocks.
Mm-hmm.
And those can be used every 3 to 4 days, or some of them are used once a week. So there's no creams, there's no mess. There are companies that send them in little syringes. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are lines on here, and you will take X number of lines depending on if you're cycling or if you're doing standard. Betty, do you guys like cycling? Do you like people to have their periods, or are you okay with
No,
the? Okay.
no. I mean, we don't have a lot of science looking at cycling later in life. As a researcher, I'm always looking at it. And, I'm going to speak just from the heart. There's one thing to look forward to at this time of life, and that is not having a period, right? Like, come on, man. Personally, I'm not a fan.
So I cycled for 10 years. So I did about at 52, started my hormones. And
Yeah.
finally at like 60, my husband goes, "Do we actually have to do this? Do you have to go through this every month?" And I'm like, "I don't mind." He goes, "Well, what if I do?" And we started laughing. And we got to the point where my uterine lining was so thin that yes, it was fine. Here's another. This is a biased, okay? Bias can come in 50-50 or it can come in 80-20. And you pull off the top, you do a click. There's a little click. You rub that on. Do you guys rotate sites or do you like to use the same sites?
We
For
generally, so when she's talking about rotating sites, it's like, are you doing it in your forearm, like soft tissue, like the skin that's very thin, so it absorbs inner thigh, behind the knee, inner arms. Yeah.
and do you like rotation?
Yeah.
And do you
Yeah.
do rotation once a week? Do you do rotation every day?
I personally, I tend to do it every couple days. I don't think it has to be an exact science. The idea being that this is thin tissue, and if you rotate, you don't necessarily just saturate that tissue, particularly fat tissue. Like fat tissue is slow. You don't want to put it like on your abdomen
Mhm.
because it's fat tissue is slow to give it up, right?
I was taught to keep it in the same place, so we did saturate. But then it was really brilliant. I looked into another story and said, once you saturate, you don't absorb as much.
Right.
So I like the idea. I do a week on, week off. So I'll do a week on, then I do a week on a thigh, because you can pass it to animals, kids, grandkids, partners. So you want to be real careful and you don't want to use it before you work out. That would
No
be an
yoga
hour.
pants. Yeah,
Yeah,
give it time. Give it time. What I tell people is you don't necessarily have to have your free bits out, but like I do it while I'm getting ready. So I'm in my undergarments, but I don't like I'm not putting on yoga pants. I'm not putting on tight shirts if I put it here because you want it to absorb in your skin first, so you're not absorbing it into the clothing.
absolutely. If people do testosterone, here is a testosterone injection.
Mhm.
Now, this is my pharmacist part of me coming out. This is a 1 milliliter vial. This is 200 milligrams. A man would use half this vial or the whole vial once or twice a week. As a woman, you generally use this vial 1/10 of 1 ml. Or in my case, I use half of 1/10, so 0.5. Now, legally and technically, each vial is only good for one usage, and you're supposed to throw it away in 28 days. Practically, I will tell you, having worked for pharmaceutical manufacturers for 10 years, that you can use it for more than one. And I just use an insulin syringe. That insulin syringe gets pulled back to a total of about that teeny little bit and goes in. No big deal. I do that once a week and it's fabulous. Now, there are topical testosterones, and a lot of women don't need and don't want testosterone. But I find that it gives me more muscle mass, it gives me more get up and go. It makes everything just a little bit more zingy and zow. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So testosterone, while you're looking at that, testosterone has not been FDA approved for use for women in the United States. UK, it has. And its indication here, we use, and so here's the thing, we use medications all the time off label, right? Enormous amount of time. So it's not like that's a really dramatic thing. But the indication that has been approved for is sexual dysphoric disorder. I don't have a libido, right? But we know that it improves the bones. We know it improves muscle mass. It's a brain, like if it's improving libido. Libido is a mood. It's not a hormone, right? Libido is a mood, which means it's going to affect moods, right? So it has an indication. Not every woman needs it, but a lot feel better on it.
And if you have trouble orgasming, I will just tell you, my clients who have struggled and said, I can't quite get over the edge, they get a little bit of testosterone and bing, fireworks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And testosterone doesn't fluctuate. Like it doesn't go wildly all over the place like estrogen. It sort of decline. It just declines from our 20s. It just does a steady roll downhill.
yeah. You can see in here the progesterone. They come in, the micronized come in these little pearls. And when taken, these can be taken orally at nighttime, and they are wonderful for helping to sleep, helping calm you down. It's the at the end of a long day. So those are most of my toys. I hope that was fun and helpful for you. Let's start answering some questions, and then we've got more that we can get back to, but I want to specifically
Yeah, I
get
want to make sure we get the questions done. Yeah.
exactly. So let's see. We've got, let me go all the way back to it. Can BHRT help with my major hair loss? What can I do for me? I'm 62. I have my DNA 360 results, and I am co-dominant. Lisa.
Awesome. Do
Betty,
you want to start or you want me to?
go ahead and start.
Yeah, so obviously co-dominant, and we've got genetics that can contribute, right? Your ability to produce DHT. So the hormone most associated with male and female pattern baldness, and especially postmenopausal and menopausal hair loss, is going to be the pathway that produces dihydrotestosterone. So here's where it's insidious, because I think there's another question about hair loss. So that's going to cause hair loss in the crown, like through here, right? Now, you can also lose hair because of thyroid problems. You can lose hair because of too low testosterone, too high testosterone, and even estrogen can contribute if it's too low. Also, nutrient deficiencies, so iron, zinc, all of those things can play into it. Inadequate protein, excessive fasting, cortisol and stress will drive it too. But so DHT as a hormone is expressed in the hair follicle. So if you were to look where the hair comes out of the skin, it's expressed in that hair follicle. Most of the research is looking at blood levels. I experienced hormone-related hair loss. I got a lot of it when I started hormones, and my DHT has never been high, never on a lab. However, if I take something that blocks DHT, like a spironolactone, which blocks that enzyme pathway, my hair loss stops and my hair starts to grow back. So what we do know is you can have expression of DHT at the scalp, but the blood levels are normal. So if you're experiencing that without hormones, it may not be that your DHT is high. You're getting expression here, and you can do topicals and shampoos and things like that. Spironolactone also works at very low doses. If you're on hormone replacement and experiencing some of that too, explore the nutrients. Always look for that. Like iron is a big one, but also you can support it with a little bit of spironolactone or a 5-alpha reductase blocker that can reduce it. But it's not well known that it doesn't have to be high in the blood, right? And that's really frustrating. Your hair will also get thinner and finer, so the strands get thinner and finer.
So I think another thing to add that complements what she's talking about is a lot of times people don't realize that minerals are the basis of all of our regrowth. So a hair tissue mineral analysis, hair and nails are excretory tissues. They are extra, so the body puts them out. Somebody who does hair tissue mineral analysis can look and say, these proportions are off, or you can see toxic metals like aluminum or mercury or arsenic. If you're having, like Shailene was asking about hair loss, look at the quality of the products you're putting on your skin, on your face, on your hair, because those toxicities can cause that lead off. As Betty was talking about, she also was saying thyroid, or most women, if they're trying to lose weight, they undereat. You're overfed because you've got too many calories, but undernourished because you don't have nutrient dense foods. So there's a lot to hair loss, but I agree. The first thing to look at your hormone levels. Like she said, the DHT may or may not show up. Dutch test or the urine metabolite tests are going to show that, and then get a little bit broader with general health type support with other.
COVID did that too. And, and sometimes like if you're experiencing it where it's kind of coming back here, like you look here and you're like, I can see it receding. That is very much like that pattern. When you have a cortisol issue that leads to hair loss, a lot of times it's diffuse, and especially like through here, it's kind of spread out. Right. And then you've got alopecia, which is like hair loss, autoimmune alopecia and things like that might be a circle. But generally you'll see the hair recede from this place first along
And
here.
another great thing to consider adding peptides, the
Yeah.
GHKCU, okay, GHKCU, I can type that in a minute, injectable heals the gut, heals and helps strengthen hair and face and all the connective tissues. But topically, it can be put on and really stimulates regrowth. My mother had the cortisol loss, so the thinning all over, like the cap. So she started wearing wigs. And of course, that was more damaging because she was suppressing everything and not washing her hair and stuff. I got her some of the GHKCU peptide that she could massage in her hair and a shampoo that she could. We got her some vitamins that were hair tissue nail vitamins and cleaned up, stabilized her blood sugar. Oh my gosh, she's like, I don't know if I'm happy or not. I have to get my hair cut twice a month now. It grows so fast. I'm like, Mama, that's a good problem to have. So, so hope that answered some of your hair questions. All right. So let's say where to go to get HRT and support. My doctor gynecologist does not want to do it. Do you all do concepts? Okay, so Betty's clinic obviously does consults, and so does the DNA company. We have specialists that do HRT, BHRT, and we can help you. There are several good online companies, but you really want to work with a company that tests. And the reason I'm saying that, there's some big companies out there that are doing a lot of HRT and they don't run any tests. And how in the world can you do this without testing? It's to me, it feels like that is just, well,
Well, it's the only hormone deficiency. Like, okay, the reality is we're outliving our hormone lifespan in our ovaries, right? And 100 years ago, a woman's lifespan was about 48, if you also include maternal mortality. And if you were lucky and very healthy and made it through all those things, you might make it to your 60s. And so, we are at a time where our ovaries haven't caught up, and our mutations in our DNA hasn't caught up to this longevity. Maybe 100,000 years from now, we'll go through menopause at 75. It won't be a big deal, right? So it can be a big deal.
okay. So for Glenda, I've been on BHRT for 15 years. Shall I come off?
No, do not.
Why? Glenda, tell me
Because
why.
there is no indication for you to come off. There is no reason to come off. When we look at like osteoporosis, osteopenia data, so like risk for that, the longer a woman is on hormone replacement, the less likely they are to have fracture or even just be diagnosed, right? And the cardioprotective and the cognitive protective aspects of hormone replacement continue if you stay on it. We have women that are in their 80s that we put on hormones in their 60s and they're still rocking and rolling because we've been doing this well over 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Glenda, if you want to put a follow up on why you would consider coming off, I think that'd be interesting. But I think you saw both of us going, heck no, man, I'm going to the grave with
As
mine.
long as you feel good, as long as your labs all look good and things are being monitored, yeah, there's no reason to.
Yeah. So Carrie says, is there a specific gene profile that is more susceptible to rheumatoid or joint pain? I've been on HRT, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. First, Carrie, I'd love to know what kind of estrogen. Is it topical? Is it oral? Same thing with your testosterone. Is it injectable? Is it topical? For over a year, but I can't get rid of joint pain in my feet and toes. I've had the DNA 360 done, I've had my Dutch test done, so I'm curious if there's a genetic profile that will look at joint pain. Um, so my first thought on that is I would want to see your numbers on your HRT and the types that you're on, but I would look more at inflammatory markers. We talked about gut health, we talked about liver health. Um, there can be too much of a good thing. So in fact, I want to address Gina in just a second about that. But Betty, what other thoughts do you have as far
Yeah,
as
so hormones, especially estrogen, progesterone, and even testosterone, we don't have as much data on that. They're immune modulatory. So when they're dialed in and at the right level, they can downregulate immune system function. And if they're too high or too low, they can also upregulate inflammatory response, particularly between the adaptive and the innate immune system, which is part of that autoimmune picture. And so when your hormones are dialed in, it may be that it could have been part of the player, because we know that there's the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. So joint pain is a common symptom. Joint pain, muscle pain, that kind of stuff, tendon tears, that kind of stuff, frozen shoulder. If all those things are dialed in, your labs look good, then you start looking at your inflammatory pathways and what's going on there, and are there potential contributors like gut health, viral load. I don't know if people saw the research that came out like 2 weeks ago, and they've got a really good study tying Epstein-Barr to lupus. Right? Like the triggering event that started the lupus activity was an Epstein-Barr virus, right? So we can't get rid of a virus once we get it, but there's a multitude of things that can contribute to like an uptick in autoimmunity, even stress, right? We don't have like a thing like do this and your stress goes down, it goes away. But when you look at it from a functional standpoint, and it's kind of like peeling an onion. It's like, okay, diet dialed in, cool. Toxins out of the body, cool. No heavy metals, awesome. Am I sleeping? We keep peeling until we find those things that we can hopefully modulate to calm the immune system down.
Yeah. And Stephanie brought up a note that said, hey, look for infections. Low-grade infections, the Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, Lyme disease, all of those could also contribute. So gut infections, systemic infections, those are the places that would go for that. I love what Shalene said. Take my hormones away from me over my hot, sweaty, dead body.
Me too. Yeah. Nope.
Love it. Okay, Carrie says, on birth control at age 14 for heavy periods, off for 3 years, starting at 26 to have my two babies, back on BC up until age 55, then on HRT, did a great on birth control and HRT. In November of 2024, went on BHRT, and now I have major hot flashes 24/7. They will not go away, even with a year of adjustments. What should I try?
So here's where we get so when you saw Dr. Stephanie, she was holding up all of those different forms of estrogen, different forms of stuff. So number one, the estrogen patch is bioidentical. So for everybody to know that Prometrium or generic Prometrium, micronized progesterone, is also bioidentical, right? There's also the creams that are compounded where you might adjust the doses beyond what's normally on the doses of these very kind of limited pharmaceuticals. The delivery mechanism can make a difference. One woman can absorb cream like a rock star. Another woman will not, right? So what I would say in these cases, when you start hormones, if you're not getting the outcome you expect, change pharmacies, change method, right? Like, is it instead of this, do a different one. And if you were feeling better on the estrogen patch and the progesterone pill, I would go back on that. The other thing I would say is test. Make sure that your levels, because when you're still having like hot flashes and stuff, that means you're not right. Your levels are not dialed in.
So one of the other things we found as a pharmacist, there are estrogen only pills. Again, I don't like the oral form of estrogen because it goes through the liver. And then if it doesn't make it through those 2 times, you've got to be really focused on that. So I don't like that. So I prefer the patch. I prefer the creams until we get you right. For people who have resistant hot flashes, there is a drug, venlafaxine. And venlafaxine at the smallest levels, like 37.5, can wipe out hot flashes in a flash. Now, have you guys used that in your practice? Have you seen that?
We very, very rare. Yeah, we do use it, but most of the time, once we get sort of the other hormone picture. The other thing I would say, especially if they're night sweats, look at metabolic function, insulin, sleep, cortisol levels, because you can get blood sugar changes too that can do that.
Yeah.
But we have used it a little bit off and on, but a lot of times we're just getting that estrogen level dialed in because it is your thermostat.
Yeah.
It is your thermostat controller of your hypothalamus.
So Carrie, I hope that was a takeaway of either change your estrogen, change your delivery system, make sure that you've got things that are definitely working for you. You should not go a full year. I mean, even a couple months. Let's go in and let's either up doses or let's look at those metabolites or let's see what else we need to do to support you.
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to jump back over here for a second. Gina said, my doctor put me on a suppository of estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone for osteopenia. I'm 68. I've been in menopause for 10 years. I feel like I'm being poisoned. I
Mm.
can barely walk and I'm in good shape. I have the worst cramps I've ever had, extreme headaches, low back pain. I feel like my back is actually broken. Nothing like what I did when I was younger. Do I stay on this? Hell
No,
no.
no. So,
Hell
um,
no.
so we do have vaginal suppositories and vaginal estrogen at extreme dilution, right? That we use to protect the tissue. Vaginal tissue is very, very absorptive. It's a mucosal barrier like the inside of your mouth. It's not like your skin on your face. And so you can be a hyper absorber. And what I would say is if you're getting cramps and things like that, because it's going to absorb and hit those estrogen receptors in the uterus, the ovaries, you're going to hit that first, right? And so if you're getting all of those symptoms, that is not a good method for you, right? On the flip side, we've had people that the progesterone, oral micronized progesterone, is so sedating, right? Because it helps with sleep, that we've had people that needed to use it vaginally because they just couldn't handle the sedation, right? So we can do that. But if you're experiencing those symptoms, then that's a sign that you're not on the right amount. Yeah, especially if you weren't having it before you went on it. Those are all signs that it's out of balance.
And I don't know, the way I'm reading this put me on a suppository of estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. I'm not an advocate of everything lumped in to
Mm-mm.
one thing. I know people say, I've got all my stuff and I've got 5 different things in here and I've got my oxytocin and I've got my DHEA. And I'm like, no, 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 no. And the reason for me, no, is then you can't modulate the different ones. So if your estrogen's too high and causing cramping, but your progesterone's not high enough, then you want to throw this whole thing away because I got to have a new one. I like mine separate. It's kind of like I like to eat tapas. I like a little bite of this, a little bite of this, and if I want to go back for more, I can. But don't lock me in to just one thing. So, okay, is there a natural, inexpensive way to do HRT yourself? And when do you measure and know how it's working?
Yeah. So so I'm gonna, regardless of what Instagram tells you, there is no way to restore ovarian function with herbs or supplements, right? Because your egg carton has run out, and when that runs out, the production of these hormones stop, right? Testosterone is still being made at a declining level, but for the most part, your estrogen and progesterone are relatively low. Fat cells can make a little bit of estrogen. There are products out there that can help reduce hot flashes because they sort of modulate some of these receptor activities, but you can't restore it. And if somebody's selling like an estrogen cream, or like I have a topical facial cream called Bias Mastery that we use for the skin, but it's a cosmetic dose. It is not a dose that's going to take your systems levels up to protect your brain, your heart, your bones. And so you do need a prescriber. Now there's a variety of ways. And sometimes the delivery mechanism makes a difference, you know, and the drugstore you go to. Some drugstores will be really high. Sometimes compounding is cheaper, sometimes it's not. And so it takes working with somebody that sort of understands how this works to figure out the best way to do it. But to actually take a level that protects you, you have to have a prescriber,
Mhm.
you know.
And that's what I was going to say. We do have um, a a group. It's called FENMAR
Mm-hmm.
that does things naturally. They do it with food. They do it with phytoestrogens,
Mm-hmm.
and they have quite a bit of success with symptomatic relief.
Yeah.
But the difference is there's symptomatic relief. I no longer have hot flashes, or I have fewer hot flashes, or my skin is still, strong. My skin isn't thin and papery like my grandmother's, where it would tear every time she touched something. I'm going for more therapeutic.
Yeah.
I want the I don't want the osteoporosis, and I want the thick, heavy skin and the collagen to be made. So I'm making sure that I do the the more therapeutic for the long term, because I believe in the long run that preventative is going to help with my overall health. So,
Yeah.
all right. So then let's go here and say how important is to test and get the dose of estrogen and progesterone right. My GYN refuses to test, citing high costs, and she started me on a mid dose of 0.05, but I feel no difference while I've been on it for over a month. How can I advocate for myself? And I want to know what my hormone levels are and not be shooting at the dark. Also, I'd like to know more information about timing and frequency of testing. And at the 0.5 milligram, always recommended the starting dose. So I've got some ideas. Why don't you start with there and see what you think?
I'm going to say from my experience from both our clinic and then also our telemedicine company, the starting dose is actually, if we're looking at a patch, is a 0.025, right? So you can start even much lower than that. I know from the research that you start to see in some women, not all, bone protection at 0.05. That's where we start to get into the reference ranges where we might see bone protection. 0.075, I would say off the top of my head, is probably a lot more likely to be the dose most women end up with. And progesterone obviously adjusted to meet that. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, someone's like, can 0.025 do much? I'm like, probably not, but that's a good starting place. And then, and so, you could advocate to go up. Blood testing is a quick, easy way to kind of get it. Yes, a lot of times if your doctor doesn't code it properly and you try and run it through insurance, or if you're in New York, New Jersey, do not try and run it through insurance. Just don't, because they will charge you a fortune just because of the way those states run. But the other thing is there are companies out there in most states, not all states, where you can order them yourself for pennies on the dollar compared to what would happen if insurance didn't cover it and they got billed for it. And so we usually look at it and say, start the dose, do what they call a titration. So up it and possibly up it again, depending on where you start and kind of what you're feeling. And we look for improvement in symptoms, and then we run it again. Usually it's at like 3 months, right? Because that gives us a chance to do wiggle room. And then somewhere between 3 and 6 months, we check the hormone metabolism. We do the urine test to match up with the DNA and check it out.
I'm sad to hear that your GYN said they cost too much, because they don't.
No.
Ignorance costs way more than a blood test. I like what Betty said about there are companies out there where you can order your own, whether it's Direct Labs or, there's a dozen. You can
There's
put
Ulta, Function Health. There's a bunch where you can just go, I want my lab test done, period. I'm going to pay for it. I don't care about insurance. Here's what you think of your insurance today. Insurance today is like your car insurance. It pays for when you wreck your car, but it doesn't change the oil. It doesn't rotate the tires. It doesn't fix the windshield wipers. It doesn't do any of those things. And that's what's happened to the insurance in the United States. We pay a ton for it, and it really doesn't provide much value unless there's something catastrophic.
Mm-hmm. And we're trying to keep you out of catastrophic.
Yes.
So, and as far as timing, Betty said it, but I want to make sure you heard it. It can take 1 to 3 months. Give yourself up to 3 months. If you don't have your baseline, get a baseline now, and then, do it again in 3 months. Get back in to see that provider. Or honestly, if they're not going to do it, find a functional medicine, do a telemedicine with Betty, do a telemedicine with DNA company. Do somebody that is hormone proactive and not scared of it. And, you can use your HSA cards, your FSA cards. There are lots of ways we can point you toward to get in that information you need. And then if you want to go back in and say, hey, this is what I found, maybe you can help them help other women in the future. Should women choose to take hormones, or should a woman choose to take hormones or not based on what was mentioned? I don't know what that was.
Yeah. I know I can kind of say what I think here. I think every woman deserves the right to look at it for themselves, to examine their own needs, their own health, their own situation, and regardless of age too. Right? There is a most optimal therapeutic window, which is in the first 10 years. You don't have to wait until you've gone 1 full year without a cycle. When the symptoms start to appear is when you can start doing that, right? You can test and look at it, but there's no reason. We have some good studies that haven't published yet that are really indicating that we might need to even start a little bit earlier, like not wait until you're like full blown falling apart. but the earlier you start it, the better. And I would say, because we're not aging as fast, because the active menopause accelerates aging. But that also means if you're like 65 and you've never done it and you want to do it today, you deserve that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Allison says, my teenage daughter has been diagnosed with PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. She had her acne is severe and troublesome. Where do we start? We just got a great naturopath who specializes in hormones, but nothing is working. We've
Mhm.
tried pills and meds and supplements. I'm thinking about having her Dutch test done. No one has suggested that yet. Where would you point me?
I mean, personally, I think a Dutch test would be good because she's cycling, right? So she's got adequate hormones. We can look at it. So PCOS, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome. In most cases, right, classic PCOS is an inherited metabolic estrogen relationship where you have some natural insulin resistance. So a lot of times they do metformin and other things, although there are other forms that aren't insulin driven. And so a lot of times they may not have normal periods. They may spread out. They might be really inconsistent or none at all. So the timing of when you do the Dutch test is important if there is a cycle at all, because you want to see it when they're both peaking ideally. But I think a Dutch test would help. And I think looking at nutrient levels, things like zinc, your vitamin D, other things also can help as well.
And the thing that I would contribute that to that is insulin, insulin, insulin.
Yep.
This is a metabolic disorder. I know you're looking at hormones. The insulin and the metabolic portion of this is playing into all the hormone disruption. I would look at gut health. I would look at her free insulin level. I would get her on a CGM so you can see what she's eating and how it's impacting her. If you can get control of her insulin and her metabolism, you'll get control of the PCOS and all of this other will go away. I would
And if
love, go ahead.
Oh, and I would say, and if that doesn't seem to be it, like if you're not seeing differences there, she could have non-congenital adrenal hyperplasia that looks a lot like PCOS, but isn't, and there is like, think of it as like a slightly different flavor that is not so insulin driven. So like the metformins and the GLPs don't affect it. So if those things don't work, then I would do a little bit of a deeper dive too.
Mhm.
There's a
Yeah.
subset that have sort of a variant that's a little bit different.
Yep. Okay. Um, I think we've already addressed, but just real quickly, what's considered low dose BHRT? As Betty was saying, if you're looking at the patch, it would be 0.25 is the lowest starting patch that there is. Progesterone micronized, 100 milligrams if you do a standard pharmaceutical dose. Now, some people do compounded and they can do 50 milligrams or 75 milligrams or 25 milligrams. Do you take the micronized, Betty?
I do. Yeah,
And
I
how
do.
much do you take?
I take 225.
Yeah, I'm 300. So we
Yeah.
got big girl doses.
Yeah, bigger doses. What I would say here is it's not so much about like what's the lowest possible dose. It's what's the dose that gets your labs into the reference ranges, the ideal reference ranges. So we know we start to see bone improvement between 50 and 80, right? Those are your minimums. We also got good data that most women are going to do better somewhere between 80 and 120, right? And so every woman's going to fall somewhere in between that. So what I would say is you want to make sure you're in those ranges where it's going to help you with your bone, your brain, your heart. If you're really looking at, I want to do this for longevity. So if it takes a 0.025 and you get there, that's your dose, right? Right. If you're in those therapeutic ranges, but you might be somebody who needs a 0.075 to get into those therapeutic ranges. So it's different, right? And I'm
Yeah,
using patch dose just because it's easier for people to understand than mLs and.
yeah, definitely. Test, don't guess, ladies. I'm
Yep.
67. I'm estrogen dominant. I'm estrogen toxic, but I have no night sweats and no hot flashes.
Cool. I've
Great.
I yeah. I'm 56. I've never had a hot flash or a night sweat. I'm estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, can't detoxify to save my life on my own without assistance, right? I have bad genetics. I think I've shared them on one of our shows.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to have hot flashes and night sweats. That just happens to be the symptoms most people relate to. But we have documented almost 100 symptoms, and I would say we have good research on about 37, right, that are associated directly with menopause. So even if you were estrogen dominant before, right, genetically, you know what that also means? You had a lot of receptors for it. So what do you think happens when you don't have it? You still have a lot of receptors. They don't go away. They actually increase in numbers as you go through menopause. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
If you have a CYP1B1, is BHRT an increased risk for cancer?
No. So if we look at the data, right? So if we look at real clinical data, we don't have a ton doing clinical, we don't have clinical trials going, let's watch this gene, let's put people on hormones and not hormones, and then track them for 20 years. We don't have that, right? It would be really expensive, number one. And you got to remember, after the Women's Health Initiative clinical trials pretty much came to an end. But the reality is that CYP1B1 gene is associated with breast cancer risk because it creates a byproduct that is toxic. The reality is we have a lot of other things that go through those pathways: pesticides, herbicides, phthalates, fragrances, all these other things. And the interesting thing is that estradiol is not associated with breast cancer. And so the reality is, this is my hypothesis, so we don't have tons of research here, but when you start looking at those pathways, when you don't have your estradiol to go sit as the key in your lock, right, the protective one, what do you think sits in that lock if you're 60 and you don't detoxify CYP1B1 very well? Your plastics, your herbicides, your pesticides, they have free range to try and click in there and get in the lock. And so I think it's more about the overall estrogen load that we see, particularly postmenopausally, when we don't have protective estrogen circulating. Because again, the average age is 62. You haven't had hormones for a really long time. Our breast cancer rates did not drop when we black box warning estrogen. It actually went up. And yes, we can detect it better, but the actual numbers have increased, beyond what would account for that. So the reality is it's more about how you help the estrogen get out, even if you're not on hormones. It's everything getting out of that pathway that's more important.
Yeah, good. Bernadette has another hair question. I think we answered most of that. Her hair started thinning over a year ago, started balding a few months ago. I asked my doctor for some minoxidil. They did a DHT check. It was normal. My vitamin D, iron, zinc, all also normal. Is there anything else I can do besides increase my protein? I'm 51, postmenopausal, and on BHRT.
Yeah, so I think we covered a lot of this. So, definitely doing a hair mineral analysis to make sure that there may not be other minerals or other things that may be off. And you might be a candidate to discuss something like a spironolactone, which is a blocker of DHT. A really low dose actually works really well. And then you can do topical DHT blocking things like shampoos and creams and things like that. Minoxidil usually works, but as soon as you stop it, it often causes shedding.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not a huge minoxidil fan
We don't
because
very much.
yeah, I think you get minimal results with women, and it's either you're stuck on it forever, or I would also look at thyroid,
Yeah.
and I would look at peptides.
Yep. Thyroid for sure, because that
Yeah.
gets missed.
Can people work with Betty's Clinic even if they're not in Texas? Absolutely. That's why they have the telemedicine.
Yep. We have an entire division that does everybody else but Texas. So we have the clinic, and then we have everybody else but Texas
There you go.
in the telemedicine.
I've been hormonally imbalanced since I was 16. I went on birth control pills for 10 years, but I got off of them. I had a hysterectomy. I only have my ovaries, so you had a partial at 44. I'm now 51. I had endometriosis, fibroid tumors, adenomyosis. My
Yes.
OB says it was the worst case they've ever seen in 40 years of his practice, all because of my hormones. I'm deeply concerned about putting hormones back in my body. I'm so confused what to do. Can you help me put me in the right direction?
Yeah, so this is where it takes a really skilled practitioner,
Yeah.
right? Endometriosis and adenomyosis, which is where the endometrial tissue kind of grows into the muscle tissue inside the uterus. And it's very, very painful, very disruptive. And endometrial tissue, which belongs inside the uterus, can grow onto other things. So it grows onto the bowels, the ovaries, it'll stick to everything. And it's microscopic, so you can't see it without going in there and looking at it. And what's interesting is, for some women, menopause makes it go away because it is stimulated by estrogen because it starts to try and bring in blood supply. Well, there's some recent research that shows that in some women, a small percentage of women, Endometrial tissue can generate its own estrogen. I don't know if you saw that, Dr. Stephanie. It was
I
like,
haven't.
I was like, damn,
Yeah.
so here's the reality. What it means is that you have a very nuanced need, right? In some cases, it might be testosterone, progesterone. Progesterone needs to be supported strongly here, right? Because progesterone suppresses some of that endometrial activity. Um, it's not to say that you couldn't do estrogen, but it's very nuanced because what you want is enough to support you, but it doesn't stimulate that tissue, right?
Mhm.
And so sometimes we play, like we have some women that are working with our clinicians that are on testosterone, progesterone, no estrogen, because it goes crazy, right? And so
And
we
would you check your metabolites? Because I would think that she would
100%,
you're going to have a
absolutely.
very high 16 hydroxy, which is the proliferative metabolite. So
Yeah.
remember, we talked about the 2 hydroxy is a good one. 4 hydroxy causes the DNA damage, but the 16 hydroxy causes proliferation. Someone who has fibroids and endometriosis tends to have a lot of 16, where whatever is planted out there, it grows and grows and grows. So there's ways to shift your processing of that. And in that case, you would not want to add, as Betty was saying, the extra estrogen because your body is already so estrogen sensitive. But that you need a highly skilled practitioner, not an average practitioner with your case.
Yes.
Okay. Um, Point of clarification. Are you saying if I'm still cycling at 46, I already have my DNA 360, I should not have a Dutch test before starting BHRT?
So
Or
if you're
rather, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're still cycling, right? You're 46, maybe your cycles are getting a little wonky, whatever that, you would be a great candidate for a Dutch. The
Mhm.
person who really should hold that expenditure until later is a woman who might be 55 and went through menopause 5 years ago, and their hormone levels are just cratered, right? Because at that point, it's very hard to pick up those levels in the urine and compare them between each other. But a 46-year-old, that's actually a perfect time to look at it because they probably are all over the place, right?
Okay, great. Allison says, I take BHRT troches.
Mhm.
How do I know which of my hormone replacement is right for us? I'm not sure why my doctor chose troches instead of creams.
Yeah. Do you want to? I mean, I know I have opinions about those and things like that.
I have opinions.
Yeah. Well, so some doctors use troches because the idea is that it absorbs through the mucosal barrier in the mouth.
Mhm.
My experience has been, and I've used myself as a guinea pig, so I take one for the team and I try all hormones on myself and run labs. I hyperabsorb there. I have to really watch what the dose is. Like, I seem to absorb really, really well. Most of it goes through the mucosal barrier, but you are going to swallow some of it, right? In Texas, we don't use troches because by the time they get here and it's 105, they're going to be stuck together like one big gumball. So we don't really do them either. What are your thoughts, Dr. Steph?
I because any oral estrogen it goes through the liver. I am not an oral fan. I just think you increase the risks. And I don't, again, I'm not somebody who likes combinations. I would much rather be able to
Yeah,
tweak things. The biggest problem that I have is we also don't know what's going on with the biofilm in your mouth.
yeah,
Do you absorb? Do you not absorb? Are you swallowing more than you think you are? Are you full of candida? Do you have periodontal disease and your microbiome is processing things differently? So that's not my preferred route.
yeah,
I do know some women who inject estrogen
yeah.
and they're having some pretty good results with that, but I don't have a lot of experience with troches except like with oxytocin or
Sure.
methylene blue or a few other things.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some people that we have put on a sublingual just because some people don't absorb creams well, some people don't do well on different mechanisms, right? Some people break out in rashes from the adhesive on this patch. So the thing you want to think about is if you try a particular style, right, of delivery and it doesn't work, change the delivery, right? Change and sometimes change the pharmacy because they use different bases. There's several bases and some people absorb through a base better than others and that makes a difference. We use a bioidentical compounded in jojoba oil. So we work with one pharmacy that produces that, unless somebody desperately wants something else. And so everybody's a little bit different.
Mhm. Lisa says Kaiser does not offer this kind of health. Who do I work with to correct this? Obviously, there are a lot of good companies out there. Betty's company, the DNA company, have options for you. There are some companies that do accept insurance, not an HMO like Kaiser, but they accept maybe a Blue Cross Blue Shield. Betty, are you guys all cash based or?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reason why is because so treating menopause and hormone replacement therapy, Medicare sees that as a quality of life treatment, which they do not pay for, and they do not pay
Oh,
for.
the luxury. Yeah.
Yeah, they do not pay for prevention. And so your traditional insurance companies then adopt that. So they look at it as this is just a quality of life thing. We're not going to cover it. And it's hard. You can't get reimbursed at the level it takes to actually treat. You'd have to run in the room and for 5 minutes, like write out a script, throw it at them and just run away. And so the people that do this well leave the industry just because they can't stay open, right? You can't make enough to stay open on the insurance model. And that's why, and it stinks. Our insurance world is broken, right? The United States has a broken medical system, period.
Well, I do think because they just took the black box off the estrogen, we
It'll
may
change, hopefully.
see some more. And I will also just tell you with your health care, you've all got deductibles, but you need to plan for your preventative care, whether it's your supplements, whether it's, some extra HRT or BHRT. The cheapest form of BHRT, as we've just said, this is considered BHRT.
Yep.
Now, if you're doing this cash, it may be $75 a box. However, there are pharmacies that will use a good RX card or some of the other discount cards, and you can get this for $10 a month. That is not cost prohibitive. Same thing with progesterone. So I know Kaiser will give you progesterone, and there's plenty of mail order pharmacies for those of you who have on your progesterone. Micronized is covered. I get 90 days of micronized progesterone for zero cost. So know that.
That's amazing. I don't. Mine is about 60. Welcome to Texas. It all depends what kind you have, right? So the other thing that Dr. Stephanie is saying here is if you get some outrageous insurance thing where they're like, your Prometrium is going to cost you $200, right? Go look at GoodRx, look up the drugs. So GoodRx is an app that you can download. Go look at Cost Plus Drugs, which is Mark Cuban's that's trying to remove, there's 100 middlemen making money on this game, and it's not the doctors. And they're all making money before it gets to you. And so there's a game to this world now because of the managed care model, just basically, killing insurance. And so there's other ways to get it where it's not so expensive.
Absolutely. And again, we've told you that you can order your own lab tests and have your provider interpret them. So if you're able, find these little pockets where you can save, but spend that money, the 100, 200, 500 for a good prescriber and save up for a good Dutch test. Now, a full Dutch test is going to cost you 500 to 750, but they can do just the sex hormones only. We don't have to do the cortisol and all the organic acids and stuff, and that's going to be a little bit cheaper. So work with your prescriber and tell them right up front, hey, this is the budget I have. What can we do for that? And a good prescriber is going to help you with that. My only symptoms are osteoporosis and brain fog. I'm 66, early menopause at 44, no BHRT yet. I'm stabilized on thyroid hormones. Since I cannot really use solid symptoms to determine anything, I've treated the osteoporosis correctly. What should I test? My CT,
PTX.
Yep, range is 650 to 880. I'm looking for that to go down to 300. I'm also looking for hormone levels per the Dutch test. My DNA indicates poor estrogen receptors.
Okay, so when you are on hormone replacement therapy, so my team has some deep experience with osteoporosis. We have DEXA and Echolite in the office. And so when you have hormone replacement therapy in there, estrogen is the foreman for your bones. If they tell the construction crew to come in and tell the demolition crew to stand down, except for a few people, right? So it helps with bone building. The FDA approved estrogen for the treatment of osteopenia and osteoporosis in 1988, right? So when you get adequate hormone levels in there, your estradiol, your progesterone, and your FSH, which is the pituitary hormone that talks to the ovaries, will start to come down. That correlates with a reduction in CTX and an improvement in another test called P1NP, right? And so we look at all of those. And then when somebody's on your hormone replacement, we check the Dutch to make sure those pathways are clearing out. But we can actually look at those bone turnover markers and see, are they moving in the right direction? Because a DEXA is a long game. A DEXA takes, a year and a half to 2 years to really see any credible difference because it's a very gross measure.
Exactly. I have a positive ANA, but a negative for RA, Sjogren's, and lupus. Would I still be a candidate for BHRT? What other things should I explore?
Yes, you are still a candidate for BHRT. There's a few studies out there where we have looked at seemingly healthy people, right? So no definable disease, right? So no RA, no Sjogren's, whatever, that have positive ANA that never do what they call differentiate, that it never becomes anything more than that. ANA can be slightly non-specific. So like you don't want to do that test when you just got over COVID or some kind of viral load because it can be high because of that, because it has different mechanisms that it's looking at from an inflammatory response. So like a rheumatologist would be like, you don't have disease yet, right? We look at it and we're like, functionally, the immune system's keyed up. Let's see if we can figure out why. But again, your estrogen may actually help you modulate those immune pathways a little bit too.
Yeah. Awesome. We are at the bottom of the hour. Do you have 5 more minutes that we can crank out a couple questions? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Katrina, you said, please explain the insulin and the glucose again. My glucose is 6 and my insulin is 5. Am I insulin resistant? So I'm sure your glucose is not 6. Perhaps your hemoglobin A1C is, which is the 3-month running average of glucose, because your glucose should be 75, 85, 95, or 100. Right. If your hemoglobin A1C is a 6, you are at pre-diabetic or diabetic range. With insulin of 5, that's actually pretty good, but we need to look at your actual glucose. We need to also look, what is your waist measurement? It seems to me, if I'm just assuming that your glucose is at a 6.0, you have some insulin resistance, and there are some great things that you could do. One, you could look at Dr. Boz's book, The Keto Continuum, to talk about reversing insulin resistance, or look at Daniel Trevor's book, The Unholy Trinity. And that talks about seed oils and sugars, artificial sweeteners and stuff in the diet, and carbs in the diet, and how to reverse. So I would have you look at that. Did you want to address something with Rebecca Lynn real quickly? I just have a note here that says Betty.
Oh, the other thing I want to say about the insulin resistance, the real way to tell insulin resistance is you have to do a glucose insulin tolerance test. Go in fasting, get an insulin and a glucose, give a dextrose load. So they give you a bunch of sugar and they watch what insulin does, because insulin will outpace the glucose. That's how we really know, like truly, it's terrible. You get lightheaded, goofy, sweaty. It's terrible. All right.
But those are either 2-hour tests, 3-hour tests, or 5-hour tests, and they're several $1,000s. So
yeah, you get stuck multiple times. It's not fun, which is why we generally don't do it. I have had people go to the lab and take a insulin fasting glucose, sent them away to go eat a particular composition of a meal based on if they've had glucose meters and stuff like that. We might alter it, and then go back and look at it without doing it. And we do it at 2 hours to see what happened, because that's kind of a cheap man's glucose.
That's a cheap way to do it.
Yeah, because sometimes we just need to see, because it's insulin just goes crazy, right? It's fine fasting, it just goes nuts otherwise. Mm-hmm. And then Rebecca asked, I'm on limited income, not on BHRT, and concerned about all the costs of tests and hormones, right? So there's more economical ways to do this, right? Now, in general, right? So if we look at conventional medicine, the treatment is, if you have symptoms, go on hormones, right? I can tell you, generally speaking, most people are going to get into those ranges where you start to see improvement in those risk patterns that we're looking at, somewhere between a 0.05 patch and a 0.075, right? Dr. Stephanie, do you see people that need to go to a one? Hardly ever. Not postmenopausally. Very rarely.
Generally, yeah, not
Yeah,
generally.
very rarely. Like the sweet spot somewhere in there. And I would say even on permetrium, the generic, right, not permetrium itself, the chances are there's only two doses. There's 100 or 200, right? So there's not a lot of variety. So could you possibly, because of limited income, go, okay, I'm going to start with those. Because the truth is, hormone replacement therapy reduces all risks of all cause mortality for cardiovascular disease, the big cancers, right? Stroke, heart attack. We already know that. And so, is it, I think of like it's good, better, best, right? So good is examining it for you and deciding if you want it, and then starting treatment and sort of looking at your own self and sort of going, okay, how do I feel? What's working, what's not? Better would be able to do that and test and make sure you're kind of at those effective levels. Best, which not all of us can do, is we get to look at the pathways and other things. But I think, Rebecca, it's really good to kind of consider doing it, even if you might not be jumping through all the hoops, because the reality is you could start it and do it and you could do your labs in a year. Toxicity and things like that don't happen overnight. They are progressive and additive, right? Because I know a lot of people ask me this too. What if I start hormones and I don't check my Dutch test within a month? I'm like, no, 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 no. We got to get therapeutic. We got to make sure your levels are at a point where we can see it. I'm not worried about it. What I am worried about is if you're doing it for 10 years and no one ever looked at it.
Right, right. So this is our final question, and I hope you guys have gotten a lot out tonight. If you've gotten a lot out tonight, I would love for you to put a 1 1 1 1, and maybe we'll do some more open mics because I just think having, the ability for you to really get all your questions answered and to really get personal is really beneficial. I would love to see that. Um, Charles says, I had stage 3 breast cancer in 1988 at 37. I had a mastectomy and chemotherapy, radiation, and tamoxifen for 5 years. I had terrible fatigue, so my gynecologist, female from Belgium, put me on natural hormones, Trieste and progesterone. When I was 62, my gynecologist retired, and after that, I had a new male gynecologist who refuses to prescribe BHRT. I'm now 75. Should I go back on?
Yeah, the reality is if you are that far out from cancer, and especially if you've been on hormones before, we wouldn't put hormones in active treatment, right? You're not going to be doing chemotherapy, putting hormones in, or doing tamoxifen along with bioidentical hormones. But there is no reason to not consider going back on them, right? There's no reason not to. The hard part is a lot of your doctors will push back because they've got it in their head that you can't have it after X amount of years. Usually 10 is what they say, because they're going on the Women's Health Initiative data, which is not an accurate picture of today's treatment, right? So I would say, see if you can find somebody else. It might be harder because you've got a nationalized healthcare system, but you should be able to go back on it. We have people that had breast cancer totally fine.
And with that, Betty, as always, thank you for coming. Love what you do, love the research. In case you haven't heard, the DNA company just added 6 new genes to our report. So get the DNA Way app, and your new gene update is going to be in there. We're actually offering 15% off the DNA 360 if you haven't had your report done, so that you can get all of our previous ones plus the new ones. If the powers of be will throw that in so that somebody can grab that. I love seeing all those ones. We love having you here. Thank you so much for being part of the DNA family. Thank you for caring about your health. And thank you so much for being someone who's proactive about her health. Dr. Betty, thank you. We love you. We appreciate you. Have a blessed night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you all.